Because George Orwell wrote dystopian novels, including Animal Farm in 1984, which had a wide influence on readers around the world, the true nature of totalitarian governments was revealed, and tyrannical regimes became more apparent. Eric Blair, who went by the pen name of George Orwell, was a well-known author, political activist, critic, and war veteran who took a stand against totalitarian states through his vivid and descriptive essays, novels, and broadcasts. Orwell became one of the most influential British writers in history. His writings attacked the totalitarian regimes of fascism and communism. Through his books, we see Orwell's thoughts and predictions for a world ruled by one party or leader. Eric Blair was born on June 25, 1903, in Motihari, India. The following year, he moved to Oxfordshire, England, and was raised there by his mother while his father stayed back in India to work. In 1917, Eric received a scholarship to Eton, a famous prep school in England. After college, Orwell joined the police force in Burma for a few years. He was stationed in Syria. Orwell wrote about his experiences as a policeman in his book titled Burmese Days. After 5 years of service, Orwell became disillusioned with British imperialism, the policy of extending the influence of a nation through diplomacy or military force. Orwell decided to move back to London, where he wrote his first novel, Down and Out in Paris and London. After a short-term career as a teacher, Orwell went on a trek throughout England. He met with the poor and the forgotten. His book, The Road to Wigan Pier, tells us of his thoughts during his journey. It moved and motivated him to try to make a difference in the world. Soon enough, there would be a conflict that would allow him to do just that, the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War, which lasted from 1936 to 1939, was a conflict between the Republicans and Nationalists of Spain. The Republicans were split into the Socialist and the Communist parties. They each had a common goal, but had different methods of reaching that goal. As a socialist, Orwell believed that the government should regulate or own all forms of business, while communists had a more extreme view, that the government should control more aspects of society, allowing few individual freedoms. The nationalists, characterized by extreme patriotism, believed citizens should praise and glorify their country and supported a tyrannical government led by one dictator. Unlike the Republicans, who were split into multiple factions, the nationalists were all united. In December 1936, Orwell traveled to Spain. In a conversation with the New English Weekly, Orwell said, "This fascism, somebody's got to stop it." Orwell was greatly influenced by political theorists of the Russian Revolution, including Leon Trotsky, who supported total socialism achieved through continuing revolution.
A leader in that revolution was a guy named Leon Trotsky, who Orwell identified as someone who was very true to Marxist ideals. And he was drawn to Trotsky as being a true revolutionary, a social democratic revolutionary. So another influential person involved in that Russian Revolution was a guy named Joseph Stalin. And Stalin proved to be a very sinister fellow who really wasn't all that interested in Marxist writings or the Communist Manifesto. What he was really interested in was power. Orwell didn't like this guy at all because he felt that he was using the ideals of Marx to his own end, just to amass power and use that power brutally.
Orwell spent approximately 1 year of military service traveling through Spain, supporting the Republican effort. During a skirmish, he was shot in the neck by a sniper's bullet. This near-fatal wound left him incapacitated, and he was declared unfit for military service. He took months to recuperate. George Orwell finally returned home to England in 1937. 2 years after Orwell was injured, the tension between the socialist and communist factions became too strong. This hindered the Republican cause, and the nationalists emerged victorious. This loss outraged Orwell and fueled his anti-communist beliefs. Orwell joined the BBC as a radio broadcaster in 1941. Amidst the conflict of World War II, the Axis powers, led by Germany and Italy, were advancing through Europe. Although Orwell did not fight with weapons, he did oppose the war with his broadcasts and writing. Nazi propaganda, advocating racial supremacy and anti-Semitism, was reaching India, and Orwell and his BBC team countered it. Aspiring to write a book that would target the Soviet Union, Orwell started to draft a transcript that would eventually be published as Animal Farm. Animal Farm was written as a satire of the Russian Revolution of 1917. The Russian Revolution was the major contributing factor to the birth of communism. Tsar Nicholas II was the leader of Russia, but that would soon change. Nicholas had many insurgent groups forming in his country. They planned to overthrow the government and establish a new nation where everyone lived equally. This idea of a utopia was founded by a European thinker named Karl Marx. The rebellion's army would come to be known as the Red Guards. Led by Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and Lev Kamenev, the Red Guards' goal was to have the Communist Party rule over Russia. The revolution ended with the abdication of the Tsar and the collapse of the imperial government. A new government was erected from the ashes of the old, and Vladimir Lenin became the premier. The Soviet Union was born. The celebration would not last long, though. After Lenin's death a few years later, his right-hand man Joseph Stalin succeeded him. Stalin's view of the country's future was different than Lenin's or his rival Leon Trotsky's. Stalin quickly rallied the people to join him, and he banned Trotsky from the Soviet Union. Stalin was much more extreme than Trotsky. He would run his country as if it were at war, constantly mobilizing his military. Any people who stood up to him were executed or sent to labor camps in Siberia. Stalin steered his supposedly utopian nation to a dystopian future. George Orwell's Animal Farm, published in 1945, was set on a farm in England and substituted playful animals for real people in the Russian Revolution. George Orwell realized how controversial his statements in the book were at the time, so he released it to the public not as a political satire, but as a fairy tale. Many soon came to realize that it was much more than that. It was a book telling the true story about Soviet communism. A few years later, in 1949, Orwell published his second best-selling novel, 1984, which predicted a dystopian future. The plot begins in Airstrip 1, in a world where the government controls virtually every aspect of a person's life, right down to their personal thoughts and feelings. In the story, two individuals escape the government and form a group to attempt to take it down. Yet in the end, they are captured and are made part of the government's new plan to make humans into mind-controlled beings. This book includes many terms coined by Orwell, such as Big Brother and doublethink, which are now referenced in many ways today. This novel became widely known practically overnight, and Orwell was fulfilling his dream, yet he had little time to celebrate. George Orwell died of tuberculosis in 1950. Animal Farm and 1984 have gone down in history as two of the best satires ever written. George Orwell's legacy lives on in his journals, novels, reviews, and columns. Even Apple made a Super Bowl commercial based on George Orwell's book 1984.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
In his writing, he witnessed and gave an account of some of the most defining moments of the 20th century. His books convinced many people of the evils and corruption of totalitarianism, and eventually inspired many others to take a stand against similar regimes. The fall of the Berlin Wall is an example of people of East and West Berlin working together to tear down a wall, which represented the divide that the Soviet Union imposed on them. Orwell found an entirely new way to take a stand against authoritarian government, which most would say is impossible to oppose. Instead of fighting, harming, and killing innocent people, Orwell simply used his own writing skills to achieve his goal. While a war destroys, writing creates, persuades, and inspires. Both can have lasting effects on history, but George Orwell proved that the pen certainly can be mightier than the sword.